Panel 5. And the topic is Future Trajectories of Asian Christianity. And the question to be taken up by the panelists: what are the future trajectories of Asian Christianity in interaction with new contexts? And the moderator is Arthur Leisure. And the panelists are Bagus Lakshana, Gudrun Lohner, Rudolf Heredia. And we'll run through a brief introduction to each one of them. Arthur Leisure, Albertus Bagus Lakshana, Gudrun Lohner, Lufner, Rudolf Heredia. Now the moderator takes charge.
Everyone, just an orientation towards this last session. The two key words in the question is future and new context. So we are reorienting our conversations to the future. And secondly, we may refine the new context from the previous discussions. The confusing word is traject. And so I feel that what we are doing in this session is like a pilot going into space. We have the map, which we talked about previously. We have the stories, which many people have talked about. We even have the strategies of how we can go forward. And now we put into that seat of a pilot and say, where are we going? And if you have not read yet this chapter 5, there are exciting topics. So I will now just ask our panelists to just present their talk as we move in towards the future with hope. And we will just move just in this particular line. So can I ask Dr.
Thank you. Like all others, I would like to start with a word of gratitude to Professor Felix Wilfred, who invited me to come here, but also previously to contribute to the volume in the company of great scholars that are very, indeed, very great. So it is my privilege to be in that company, I have to say. And with regard to the origin of my article there in the part 5 of the volume, it's about multi-religious belonging. When Dr. Wilfred emailed me about that, I know that it was through my former advisor in Boston, Professor Frank Clooney, proposing or inviting me to write something about multi-religious belonging in Asia. I was elated, but at the same time, I had this feeling of apprehension because my work has not been up to that point about that. I was working back then, I just finished my PhD at Boston College in comparative theology, working on the interactions between Muslims and Christians in Asia with regard to these cultural interactions that lead to like deeper comparative theological involvement through the practice of ziarah or local pilgrimage culture in Java, but also in Bali and different parts of Asia, actually. So I don't know how to connect this with the multi-religious belonging topic, but anyway, I tried to do that, and if my remarks here this morning are geared toward those two keywords, new and what else? Future and new context, then I would like to just address those two keywords. What are new in my article, and what are the new contexts? What are the future of the research here, but also responding to the new context? And I think I have the advantage to speak at this point after we have gone through a process in our meeting. So I would like to address those concerns raised in the last days or so here in this room among us. My topic is multi-religious belonging, and in that piece of mine in the volume, I raised these questions. If traditionally multi-religious belonging has been discussed and understood as a phenomenon that resulted typically in a hyphenated religious identity, Hindu, Christian, Buddhist, Christian, Hindu, Muslim identity, a very self-conscious act of having loyalty to more than one religious traditions, then I'll be fine with that. But when I look at what is happening among ordinary Christians in Asia, I have some doubt about the usefulness and validity of this kind of way of thinking or discussing about the phenomenon. Indeed, the phenomenon might be there, but I don't think that it is that kind of thing, that it is self-conscious act of having probably the same loyalty to different religious traditions, doing practice, believing in the theological systems of both or many religious traditions at the same time. Then there is this theological problem of integration. That might be true with regard to great people, great persons in the history of Asia, whether they're Asians themselves or they're people coming to Asia for that kind of purpose. But my interest lies in a different direction. That is, try to see what is the new context in the ordinary lives of the Christians and also the Muslim, also the Hindus that I encountered. So I come to the conclusion that the MRB, the multi-religious belonging, as it has been discussed so far in the academic world, tends to be elitist. It is based on a very kind of narrow understanding of religion, as if religion is something private. It can be detached from culture, and it is, owned by me or by you as a person. My interest lies in the interaction between religious thinking and practice and cultural milieu or cultural context and the agency of the local community. I would like to bring the agency back to the ordinary Christians rather than the religious virtuosos or elites, those great people that have those multiple religious belonging explicitly as an identity. So that's why I move to what is going on in practice. And my case, and this is very limited, I know, that's my argument. And then to boost my argument, I go to the example of the Ziara or Dargah culture. Just the other day, I went to a Sufi shrine just across the street. That's very interesting. That's the kind of thing that I'm talking about as an illustration of what is multi-religious belonging entails among ordinary Christians. They share the same shrine sometimes with the Hindu others or the Muslim others, in the case of Indonesia, or with the Buddhist others, with the Protestant others, if you will. If we are different, we are not different that way. But sometimes in Indonesia, we are differentiated, Catholics and Protestants, which is silly. But again, my interest lies in knowing more about the dynamics of interaction between those communities. And I speak about communities, not just individuals, not individual pilgrims who share the shrines, but also the interaction between communities throughout the ages in that particular area, boosted or made possible by the kind of culture, the constellation of local culture that is there, making the interaction more conducive and long-lasting. And I would say that that culture is very rich. It is a very rich culture because still based on the more integral cosmology, where the human person is deeply related with the divine through the cosmos, through the community, when communality is a very important factor in the identity of the person. So, when in my research I found out that the interactions between those pilgrims of different religious communities are very fluid because they inhabit the very same cultural kind of atmosphere, making it possible for me as a Christian, as a Catholic comparative theologian, so to speak, in the making, it was back then, to imbibe in the richness of the other religious traditions without having this hyphenated, necessarily hyphenated multiple religious identity. I would not call myself a Catholic Muslim comparative theologian. That doesn't probably exist. I have to be a Catholic theologian by definition, but my exposure to the world of the other through my culture, Japanese culture, in the shrine rituals and the shrine kind of tradition is making my identity complex, and it is multiple. In my case, it might be self-conscious because I'm a theologian, but in the case of ordinary Christians, the dynamic is more probably not self-conscious, but their identity becomes multiple, becomes complex, not because of self, acknowledgement that I also belong to the Muslim community, that I also belong to the Hindu community, but by sharing something deeper through the help of local culture. Now, this is a very particular argument. Not every local culture is conducive, probably, for that kind of engagement. But that is my actually argument. And the structure of the kind of engagement is also very interesting. It is made possible by the richness of the local culture. In the shrine tradition, for example, the identity of the saints being venerated are also hybrid. The role of the saints as not just somebody exemplary to emulate in our lives, but somebody who is present, not somebody in the past. History is not something in the past. It's not events in the past, but something to be enacted with the paradigmatic figures of the community. So this understanding, for example, makes possible both the Christian communities and the Muslim communities to come together around a certain paradigmatic figures. So that's why they're encountering each other on that level. Thank you, I have 5 minutes. And also the understanding of, the cosmos. Local cosmology is very important in bringing those diverse religious communities together. Through this, again, the third medium, tertium quid, the third medium, a cultural space, which is kind of fluid, but it is quite there, and people recognize the value of that. And different religious communities imbibe in the richness of this local cosmology. Whether you're Christians or Muslims, you are inhabiting this same kind of paradigm of looking at the significance of your space, of the sacred space that you inhabit. And you inhabit the sacred space together, and you interact there. So there are many other things that I can talk, but I move to the significance of this phenomenon. Why I call it a multi-religious belonging, or rather complex religio-cultural identity, as a way to move forward. I know, and we know all very well, and it has been raised several times in this occasion as well, the rise of some very radical purificationist agenda on the part of the Muslims, on the part of Christians, almost everywhere. Radicalization, but I'm talking not about politics per se, but rather about cosmology, about how theology can engage us, can put us in a better framework, putting humanity not in isolation, but putting humanity back into the richness of relations, of communio, if you will, if you're into that kind of theology. Interacting with God, with the divine in a very complex kind of way, through history, through sacramental principle with created reality, for example. All those things are there in the Ziarah culture that I research on. And it has become a widespread phenomenon throughout Asia. India is a primary example for that, Sri Lanka as well, despite the difficult relationship with the Buddhists, but there is this interaction as well, on that very level. So, what is about that for the future? I think the future, if we have to win this war, if we call it the war of ideology, something is going on trying to get us, religious communities, to a certain kind of thinking that is so limited and narrow, separating us from our community, our communalism, and then also from the cosmos, for example. Then this kind of culture, local culture that is inhabited by different religious groups has to be boosted. We have to defend that in the face of the growing radicalism of ideology on that level. Again, I'm not talking about politics. It comes and goes. But this ramification on how to live as people, the richness of that kind of cosmology has to be defended not by doing some kind of interfaith dialogue per se, but rather by supporting those cultural forces. Christina has raised this kind of question. What kind of forces are there that should be shaping the shape of Christianity in the time to come or going forward? I think this is one of those forces. Cultural practices that are leading toward more integral life. That is at the core of Christian theology as well, before the breakdown of this cosmology in high Middle Ages and then Enlightenment, then high modernity, and then what we have seen now in the West, for example. So to conclude, please conclude. I would like to say that the future research in Asia with regard to multi-religious belonging has to be directed to those movements. Cultural, not always religious, not always religiously defined, but cultural movement that is boosting this kind of cultural interaction. For example, the local Aboriginal or indigenous religious movements. There are now movements that try to come back to the roots of our culture in terms of religions, trying to move away from a very narrow understanding of religion and try to get the native, that is suppressed, the native legacy in terms of religiosity, natural religion, you might call it, but it is a very Western way of calling it. It's the indigenous religious traditions. They're on the rise now in Asia. In Indonesia, I see it every day. That kind of movement has to be taken into account in the research of this kind, talking about what multi-religious belonging entails in the ordinary lives of Christians, not just elites. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Bagos. Again, just let me give you key words that I heard when I went. The big one is MRB, which is multi-religious belonging. But he kept on coming back to community, engagement, interaction, communal activity. So some of the key words that he talked about, and then the cosmos. But those key words will hold, and then we'll come back and can discuss later on in the open panel. But now I ask Dr.
Let me also thank Dr. Felix Wilfried for inviting me as the other, as in a non-Asian, to participate in the handbook and to give this lecture now to you. I want to start with an event which happened very recently in India, my second home. In the outskirts of Ranchi, one Catholic community bought a picture of Mother Mary as a statue, looking as a tribal, with a tribal face, with a baby on the arm, and having a sari in white with red borders, as the typical tribal people wear that. And the size of the statue is rather insignificant, less than the size of a woman, standing on a pedestal like so many other saints stand in India everywhere. But this particular statue suddenly arose the anger of the tribal Hindus in that area, put together by some Hindu organization, and suddenly 6,000 people assembled, fighting that this statue should not exist because Christians are taking the tribal face of Mary in order to make tribal people to convert to Christianity. My topic in the handbook is art and architecture in Asia. So this is a topic which is very controversial right from its beginning. Let us also have a short look back in history. The King Akbar the Great, the Muslim king, asked in 1578 Jesuits to come to his court. He, as a Muslim king, asking the Christians to come and bring the Bible and the laws of Christianity along with them, and to stay with him and discuss about their religion. And they came and brought with them a Bible illustrated with 150 engravings of Christian stories of the Bible. And the analphabet Akbar asked his miniatures paintings artists to come and look at these engravings and make miniatures, colorful miniatures of these black and white Bible engravings. And these miniatures partly exist till today, and they are the first examples of dialogue in art in India at the Mughal court. And he was so fascinated by that he also asked the artist to paint Mary and Jesus and all the saints on the outside of his palace and inside. And his son even painted his whole grave with these paintings. And there was big opposition about the Muslims, because Muslims traditionally do believe that one should not paint any living being, leave alone some people from the Quran. And this dialogue in art, which started there, is everywhere present in India. Starting from the cross, which you can visit here on the St. Thomas Mount, the Thomas cross, or the Persian cross, or the Pahlavi cross. This is supposed to be the oldest art piece in India of Christianity. As it is a granite cross, one cannot say exactly how old it is, because granites are very old, but the inscription is a minimum from the 8th century or older. Because afterwards Pahlavi was extinct. It was no more used in Persia. It was an old Persian language. And that cross, which is on the Thomas Mount, is already an indigenization or inculturation, because the cross is standing on some vegetation, most probably a lotus flower, and it has a special significant Toran around it. Similar crosses can be found in China at a similar time, and later along the Silk Road, where also crosses standing on the lotus flower, the sign of purity, were used as a sign of resurrection. All this has been definitely controversial, because the people felt that the newcomers are borrowing from the other already existing ones, and likewise want to make conversion to the new religion easier. So in all the Asian countries, this has been happening, particularly in China and India, initiated in India by Akbar and in China by the Jesuits themselves. And it has been going on with Adaraya, the first Indian bishop in India, with his big cathedral in Donakal, which he built in the middle of nowhere for a few peasants and tribals, but in a very big size as a hybrid combination of Muslim and Hindu architecture, saying that the people should look up at the Christianity as something worthwhile, as the other religions also have, even for the poor people, marvelous temples and mosques. So these are some examples. And I'll give another example from the modern time. The most famous Islamic artist in India died recently in London, because he was attacked by the Hindus and couldn't come and die in his homeland, Hussein. Hussein, as a Muslim artist, was very fond of Mother Teresa, and he was not paid anything for that, and nobody asked him to pay Mother Teresa. He, out of his own decision, went and painted more than 150 paintings of Mother Teresa, which have become a legacy in itself. And if the order of Mother Teresa would have been a little more careful, they would have now treasures, because he gave them also several of these drawings as a gift. But the order sold it immediately, At that time, they were a few $1,000s. Today, there are hundreds of thousands of dollars. One picture of Mother Teresa will sell for about $50,000 today in the auction of Hussein. And it is that he said he struggled to paint Mother Teresa. And he said, she is so important, I cannot paint her face. And then he thought of two traditions. He thought of his Muslim tradition, where the Muhammad is also not painted with a face, either with a veil or hidden or something, if he has painted at all. And then he went to the Renaissance cathedrals in the West, and there he saw the saints having some items in the hands. So he said, I'll paint her without face and just with a sari. And that has become the faceless Mother Teresa. He has embedded as a motherhood in itself. So this interreligious dialogue in art is unfortunately not taken account of by the churches. They are losing that opportunity to see that the museums of today are the cathedrals for many people who are intellectuals and people. There is a tendency in India among the Christianity now only to go to the margins. There is nothing wrong to go to the margins. There is also very good to take account of the religion and the customs and the paintings of the marginalized society and the Dalits and the women and the Adivasis. But one should have a balance of both. There is always a tendency, first one took the inspiration only from the Brahmanical Hinduism, and similarly in China from the Confucianism and the higher literati. Now it is the other way. We take the inspiration of the Dalits and the tribals and leaving out the other people. So both should be considered in a dialogue. So there are local trends on one hand in the inculturation in art, which are going on in especially all the Asian countries, but particularly I would say in India and China, and also very little in Korea and little more in Vietnam and Philippines. And a lot also in the area of dance and dramas, and also in the music. That also includes Indonesia. And on the other hand, there is a globalized trend going together with the McDonald culture, which is invading Asia. This McDonald culture is also a globalized Christian McDonald culture. That is like modernism, that is particularly going hand in hand with the Pentecostal and charismatic churches. Their church would be identical, like a clone. If you have it in Korea or Indonesia or India, it's a modern room like this. It's not looking like a church. It is looking like an auditorium with an AC, with a projector, with all the highest equipment, because it is standing for modernization. And it wants to attract the people from the margins to show them, you have arrived. You are welcomed. You are now like the other people. And in this type of globalized world, art seems to be disappearing. And there is no place in these Pentecostal groups for art in itself. It is only a westernized, multifunctional building. That is very sad. And on the other hand in hand with the emerging liberation theologies and the religious theologies in the Asian context, for example, in Japan and China, one can see very interesting emerging trends in art, particularly in China, where borrowing and cross-cultural is the norm. And most of the artists who are really doing the very impressive paintings, they might be not so devotional, so not every church would like to have them. Not anybody want to have a Christ crucified by F.N. Sousa in their church because he's looking so horrific. So people would not want to have this as a devotional picture. But from the point of understanding the suffering of Christ at the cross, they are very, very speaking. And they are identifying. The Tate Gallery has a beautiful F.N. Sousa showing the suffering Christ, identifying with the black and the brown and the marginalized migrative people in England. So global trends are emerging, and at the same time local trends, and this side by side is going together. And what has to be fought against is this way of purification, that some churches think we must have only a Christian picture by a Christian artist, and that should be a white, blonde Jesus Christ. And there are still communities all over Asia who think that a white Christ is superior than to a brown Christ. The otherness has to be accepted, and these global trends have another very good dimension also. Some art which is emerging today in China and in India, you cannot say this is Indian or Chinese, or this is Japanese, or this is Korean. And the marginalized people are also part of creating this type of art. They are bringing up topics, and they are of interest to the West also. They are making a mission to the West, and by making this mission and transition to the West, they become a new type of globalized art, but originating in Asia and speaking to Western Christians and bringing the gospel in a new light with new questions to the audience who has already lost interest in Christianity. So in a way, the mission is turning its address. It is going to the West with a lot of art. And the mission organizations, who earlier was always looked a little belittled because their mission art, that is not great, now are some of those organizations which make it possible for many people in the West to see the marginalized and the poverty issues and the women issues through that art in a new light in connection with the gospel. And let me conclude by saying the story of the Samaritan woman, John 4, is a very speaking story in the Indian context of the caste issue. And so many pictures have been painted about that and shown in the West. And by that paintings, many Christians have become aware of the caste issue and of the women's split in India in particular. Thank you.
Then you talk. Just a recap of what I heard. Interreligious in art is a controversy. It's ignored by the church. It needs to be reimagined and brought up again. However, there's hope on the global and the local level that art may be used again, once again, in order to tell the Christian story. So let us have our third.
Let me begin with the formality of thanking the organizers for inviting me, but I would really like to thank the audience for listening to me. That's more difficult sometimes. Well, I will not refer to my contribution. I assume you have read it before coming here. It could be a wrong assumption, but you could make it true after the talk. But these are the leftovers from my contribution, which couldn't go there because the editor wouldn't allow it. All of us are... Not that I asked him, but I knew about editorial terrorism. So. I speak from a Catholic tradition because I'm familiar with that. Okay, so I hope no one will take offense to it, because it's still, Catholic is still within the Christian tradition, and as a Jesuit, I am still within the Catholic tradition. So I want to start with the trajectories. First of all, I want to talk about the threefold dialogue. This is the path for the churches in Asia, with the poor, with poor people, with cultures, with peoples of different cultures, with religions, with people of different religious traditions. The church has to be a prophetic witness to the kingdom. I think if we forget this, then we might as well forget about the kingdom and forget about the church. A kingdom of peace and justice, of fellowship and harmony. This is a vision. It is not a blueprint, where there will be no more weeping and God will wipe every tear from every eye. This was Gandhi's dream. Is this the dream of the church today? It's a question. I want to put this religious disarmament in context, first by talking about military disarmament. When we talk about military disarmament, we are talking about an intention for peace, of giving up war, of giving up conflict, and moving towards peace. So you bracket away, you put away your arms, and you approach disarmed in order that both sides may begin a discussion, a dialogue. Raymond Panikkar speaks of cultural disarmament. By bracketing off our cultural values and priorities in order to find common ground together so that we might move to higher ground together. Now, I'm extending that to religious disarmament. Can we empty our hearts, as someone said, in terms of religious dialogue, and open our hearts to others? There is this Eastern meditation of the shunyata, of emptying the self, of unselfing the self. We must make this now a community exercise if we want to have a sincere religious dialogue, interreligious dialogue. Okay. This will open up the fusion of horizons, which will converge beyond our present horizons. Of course there are differences, but are we on the same path or are we on different paths? Will we meet beyond the horizon, over the rainbow, or will we be still different then? I think this is a question that for which Christianity has an answer, and I think the others too, certainly Advaita and many of the other traditions do. Now let me start with the dialogue of the poor. Of course, this is the poor here has to be understood as the anavim, the vulnerable, the defenseless. And this must be in the context of justice, so option for the poor and the promotion of justice. But the concrete description of this would be to work for a structural change towards counter-cultural communities of solidarity, which is the opposite of the neoliberal global capitalism today. This is the structural change we need, I believe. And one thing Pope Francis is pointing out is the contradiction in his last encyclical, Evangelii Gaudium, the contradiction between the Christian vision and the neoliberal capital market, free market oriented vision. And this is called controversy among conservative Catholics in the USA. They're threatening not to support the church with funding. More concretely, I would like to express this vision in terms of Catholic social teaching. Now, I know this is Catholic, but since the Archbishop of Canterbury is kind of foregrounding it, and the Tory party and the Labour Party are foregrounding it, I suppose it's acceptable in a Christian audience like this. So this is premised on the gospel vision of the kingdom. This again is a vision, it is not a blueprint, and we must not mistake it for a blueprint. But the Catholic social teaching is not a blueprint either, it's a roadmap. A roadmap to make that vision a little more concrete. Now, what are the key priorities in Catholic social teaching which the church must emphasize and foreground? The dignity of the person, not the autonomy of the individual. That is the liberal understanding. The dignity of the person. Therefore, not individualism, but personalism. What does this mean? We are persons in community, and we are a community of persons. This must be our social vision. Okay? And this implies a regime of human rights and the rule of law. Okay. Now, this has to be operationalized. Another principle of this teaching is the common good, not the utilitarian, the greatest good for the greatest number, but the conditions in which individuals and communities, not just persons, but communities can develop their full potential given to them by God. Now, to do this more concretely, there's the principle of subsidiarity. When I studied sociology, this was not even in the dictionary of the Department of Sociology in Chicago. Subsidiarity, what is that? They hadn't heard of it. Capitalist society. Okay? So it involves a downward devolution, not a decentralization, but a devolution of authority and power. It also implies an upward coordination of at various levels and an overall solidarity of the community. You cannot have justice and equality unless you have fraternity or solidarity. I think there's a contradiction over there. Another principle is property as social. There is a social teaching of Gilbert Keith Chesterton and George Bernard Shaw called distributism. That is, each person must have enough property to protect their rights, but no individual should have so much property that they can interfere with other people's rights. Okay? So this is not the free market. This is a kind of democratic socialism or a socialist democracy. Okay? Another principle should be not just an ethic of the just war theory, but an ethic of non-violence. Now, of course, this is a dream, to have a completely non-violent society, but so are the Beatitudes. So is the gospel. So this is a goal-oriented ethic. It is there as a critique, a reference point for us to jog our consciences along. We would never have come to this preemptive war theory, which is now being accepted, if we had talked about a non-violent society and not just the just war society. Okay. So what we need is the prophetic vision of the early apostolic church. They used to say of them, see how they love one another. Today, I think people should see Christians and say, who are these people that they do what they do and why do they do it? That's a prophetic witness. They see us and they ask the question with a different tone of voice. Who are these people? Why do they do this? I don't understand. But it doesn't jog their conscience, it makes them inferiorize us. Now, coming to the dialogue of cultures, I want to distinguish pluralism, plurality, and pluralization. Pluralism is an attitude, an ideology. Plurality is the reality of society. All modern societies are plural, either structurally or culturally. Okay? Pluralization is the process that leads to this. This is inevitable. All traditional societies were plural societies, but not all plural societies were pluralist societies. A plural society can be a segmented society. Caste is plural, there are many castes, but they are segmented. Race is plural, there are many races, but they are segmented. A pluralist society is an integration of differences in a higher unity. That is a pluralist society. Now, I think the real question here is to decide, whether we have a plurality among us, de jure or de facto. The de facto is given over there, but is it de jure? Many would say, no, all things will be one in Christ, so finally there will be no pluralism. Are we willing to accept this? Or are there many mansions in my Father's house? I think there's an issue here to be sorted out. Thomas Aquinas admits or suggests that the diversity of creation reflects the creativity of the Creator. So he is suggesting, and I think I would go with him, that God willed a diverse, plural world. What will happen after this in heaven, we will wait and see and find out. But let us not anticipate that all of us are meant finally to enter the church. All of us must be converted. There will be only one God and one people here and now. Now, one of the ambiguities about, or shall I say the negativities or the criticism of pluralism is that it's equivalent to relativism. This has been the great fear of the CDF, the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith. They're probably living in a pre-modern world. Now, in a postmodern world, relativism reflects the skeptics and the cynics of old. Okay, they want and these were in the East and in the West. Relativism is not the monopoly of the West. We have lots of relative philosophies in Hinduism and in the East. Okay, and it's premised on the idea that all truths are equal. Your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth, and we must understand and accept each other. You're okay, am okay. This is a dangerous situation because when we are living in community and there is conflict, then truth is ethical truth and other truths are decided by majority vote. Opinion polls decide who is right and what is happening, okay? Or it is decided by the powerful. Might becomes right. And I think this is the real danger of relativism. But pluralism is not relativism. It is saying there are many truths. They are not equivalent, they are different. And we must respect the freedom of people to seek truth. But it doesn't mean that all of them will find the same truth. They will find different truth. And the vision for this, the philosophical vision for this, it comes from the Jaina tradition of Anekantavad, the many-sidedness of truth. Those people who quest for certainty end up in authoritarianism and dogmatism, one truth, one leader, one nation, one language. I think that's very dangerous. It gives a lot of security, but it also opens up to a great deal of oppression. And certainly, this kind of attitude of authoritarian dogmatism is inadequate to the mystery of life, to the mystery of being, to our understanding of God and the divine, unless our God is a very small anthropomorphic God. Okay? Even in science, there is an admission of multiple understandings of reality. Okay? Is that already to conclude? Oh my. I could stop, but there's more to say. Okay, I'll try and hurry it up. Okay. I thought since there are 3 on the panel. So you want me to sit down? Okay, thank you.
I could only say to a fellow Jesuit that kind of stuff.